I had a request from one of the viewers about doing a video on my go-to meals, and I thought I would talk a little bit about that, some of the things that have changed over the years because my go-to meals have changed definitely over the years. Some of it has to do with how we eat now, some of it has to do with the size of our family. And so I'm just going to kind of tell you what my go-to meals are right now and then kind of give you some backstory of what some have been in the past. So currently I am feeding 11 people, and my go-to meals are things like taco soup and chili. I do those in the crock pot. I have the taco soup recipe on my blog, raisinarrows.net. I'll link that below. And it's just a really big pot of soup that has like corn and black beans and garbanzo beans and diced tomatoes and rotel. And it just makes this really big pot of soup. We'll a lot of times have bread with that or cornbread or something like that. Chili's the same way. We have sour cream and Fritos and cilantro and sometimes cornbread with that too, sometimes cinnamon rolls. My husband really likes cinnamon rolls. I have our cinnamon roll recipe on the blog too, so I'll link that down there as well. Another one, I wrote these down here, nachos. That is one that we go to a lot. I keep tortilla chips on hand, and I will cook up a big batch of hamburger at the beginning of the week. And I will just put it into a baggie. And a lot of times, the day that I cook up the big batch of hamburger, that's the day that we have nachos. So we'll just lay out chips and cheese and sour cream and salsa, and sometimes I have avocados on hand. I rarely get them made into guacamole before they get eaten. We really like avocados here. So sometimes we'll just cut those up and put those on there as well. And then I'll put the rest of the meat away. But nachos are really a simple meal, and for me, I'm not eating the chips, but they're really good for me to have without the chips. They taste really great. So I will just leave out the chip layer and put everything else out because I'm doing more of a low carb type diet right now. Another go-to meal that we have currently is bierox in a bowl. And these are basically deconstructed bierox. They don't have the bread on them. I used to make bierox fairly regularly, and I would cook up a big batch of dough and roll it out and do the bierox meat and put it in and then bake it and all of that. I just don't feel like I have time for that anymore, and to make the amount that I have to make in order to feed my family is just kind of exhausting. So I very rarely make actual bierox, but bierox in a bowl are really simple. I will just fry up the meat and then I add in cabbage, and a lot of times I will go and just buy the cabbage mix that's in the like the coleslaw mix, and I'll just throw that in there, like two of those in with my meat and mustard and cheese, and that's it. And then it's in a big old skillet, and we just eat out of that with like a vegetable side or something. As far as like lunch meals, I do soup, salad, and sandwiches, and I have a post on my blog about that's what we do. It's always just soup, salad, or sandwiches. So the sandwiches, I always have deli meat and cheese or peanut butter and jelly and bread on hand. And for soup, I usually buy about 4 cans of the large soups at Aldi, and I keep those on hand. And then we also sometimes have homemade soup that we've done. And salad, I keep salad fixings on hand. And so that's what we have for lunch every single day, unless there's leftovers. And then they can pick from the leftovers as well. But I pretty much try to make lunch a total no brainer. Breakfast is kind of the same thing. I have cereal and breakfast bars, and sometimes I make muffins. And then I have cottage cheese and hard boiled eggs, and sometimes some sausage patties on hand so that everybody can kind of get what they want for breakfast and we don't have to really think about it too much. Back when I was doing Trim Healthy Mama full time, one of my biggest go-to meals there was the cheeseburger pie. Absolutely loved that. Probably made it 2 or 3 times a month. My whole family liked that, and so that was my go-to meal back then. I also did like the chicken fajita nachos, and I have a link to that as well. That's on my blog, how I made that work. Other than that, I was eating a lot of like Greek yogurt with PB2 mixed in it. And I prefer monk fruit over stevia, so I tend to use the little monk fruit packets for things like that. But those were my go-to meals when I was doing Trim Healthy Mama. Now, back up quite a ways to when I had a much smaller family, and a couple of my go-to meals there were chimichangas. These were a baked version that was in a cookbook I had gotten when we first got married. And you just cooked up the hamburger meat, and then you had the tortillas, and you rolled the hamburger and the cheese into the tortillas, and then you sprayed them down. Like, I would get that butter spray, and I would just spray the butter spray all over the top of those and put them into the oven, and you bake them pretty high heat for about 13 minutes, I think it was. And you took them out, they were nice and crispy, and that was a really super simple meal for our family. I don't do that so much anymore. I actually hardly ever buy tortillas anymore. My kids don't really like tortillas, and I don't eat tortillas anymore. And so that's not a meal that we make. And I may have to try it again just to see if maybe they would eat it wrapped up like that. But just to have tortillas on hand, they just never get used unless we're making like tortilla roll ups where we put the cream cheese and the meat and the black olives in there. They do like that, but that's a rarity that we make something like that. Another one of my go-to meals back when I just had a few kids was something called pepperoni hopple popple. I can hardly say that, but it has a funny name, but the kids really liked it. And it was basically in a cast iron skillet. I would melt some butter and I would put tater tots in there. And I would just put the lid on them and let them kind of cook down. And they had eggs in them as well, and cheese. And then over the top was a layer of pepperonis, and that was supper, and my kids loved it. Well, now, a skillet, even a big skillet, isn't really going to feed our family, so that is something we hardly ever have. Another meal that we used to have fairly regularly, I don't even know what you would call it. I don't know if it's honey and chicken or something along those lines, but it was basically just chicken and cream of something soup and cheese and stuffing, like boxed stuffing over the top of that. You'd stick it in the oven as a casserole, and that was something we ate fairly regularly too. Back then, we did mostly canned vegetables. Now we do mostly fresh or frozen. And that's just the difference between our income and our health standards. I guess the things that we prefer to eat would be frozen or fresh because they taste better. But back in the day, canned was what we could afford. And so that's what we bought. And there is no shame in that. I mean, I'd rather be getting veggies than no veggies at all, even if they are canned. It's just not that big a deal. But anyway, that's some things that have changed over the years. Our meals are obviously much bigger. And so back in the day, I could make a little small pan of something and that was plenty. In fact, I would make a bigger pan and we could have leftovers all week. Well, that doesn't really happen anymore. I am learning, though, how to make enough for our family that we do have leftovers. It's just kind of an ongoing process because as more people begin to eat, my little people are eating more and more now, and as they get older, they eat more and more, and so it takes more to make leftovers. So those are my go-to meals. They're pretty simple. Honestly, I like to try to keep things pretty simple when it comes to our meals because we do have feast days. We have days where we're celebrating, and those days I get a little more elaborate with our food. But on the other days, I really want to not have to think about our meals so much. I like to have things just kind of pre-prepared, and I can just throw it together in a very short amount of time and have dinner on the table, and we can all focus on eating together as a family rather than me spending a lot of time in the kitchen because honestly, I don't really like to cook. I mean, I like to cook okay. I really hate to clean up after I cook. So, there's that catch 22. But I'm just not that fond of cooking. There are so many other things I would rather be doing. I'd rather be spending my time teaching the kids, doing things together as a family. And so I don't like to be spending a ton of time in the kitchen, but yet I do want to have healthy, nutritious meals for the kids. I'd love to hear about some of your go-to meals. Maybe it'll give me some inspiration as well. So you can leave that down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so that you can enjoy a whole bunch more content here at Raising Arrows. I really enjoy having you guys here, and I enjoy the comments and the interaction. YouTube is a really great place for people to just kind of build that community and help each other out. So I really appreciate you being here and watching this.